Alright guys, let's hop into it. The Blizzard Sorceress in Season 4. So for starters, let's go ahead and go over what essentially has actually changed with this build, as there are a couple newer updates that do make this build a little bit stronger. So for starters, you can actually masterwork on the specific temper, ice spikes, and get a crazy amount of damage. Now, in the gameplay that you're seeing, I don't have everything completely min-maxed yet, but the thing is that it'll start feeling really good for killing bosses versus the Frozen Orb build, which is one of the more popular builds and probably one of the better cold builds in the game. However, it does suffer from bosses, whereas the Blizzard build does not. This is a very frequently asked question. Which one is better, Blizzard or the Frozen Orb Sorceress for Season 4 for the best cold Sorc? And honestly, the Blizzard build seems to be way better for bossing, where the Frozen Orb is just better at clearing out the trash in the game. And I would say also another good thing is ice shards if you want to clear up trash with like the pants, the Ice Heart Brass unique pants. But there is another unique that actually makes this build a little bit more powerful in this season, and that is because you can have higher uptime on specifically your ice armor, and that is an item called Yen's Blessing. So what this does is it makes it so you have the ability to just upkeep one ability. For the most part, you're going to be able to see, as long as we are in combat, we will have pretty much 100% uptime on the ice armor. And the only times where it'll kind of go down is when you're moving in between a pack. It may go down for a brief moment because you need to get to the area, you need to activate your skill, or the enemies need to hit you in order for it to activate. But what Yen's Blessing does do, in the very beginning, you do need to activate some of your other cooldowns that may trigger this, like, for example, your Flame Shield, because you need to proc some sort of fire damage for Talrash's Ring to actually ramp up in damage. The item would allow you to maybe reset your Flame Shield, but it's mainly for the ice armor because you can get a lot more damage with ice armor, or you can get a lot more survivability, because the way Blizzard works in the game is you throw it down and the enemies will just kind of walk towards you and they may walk out of it. Your goal is to make them stay inside. So a lot of times what you will see is if the target is not frozen, well, they're just going to start hitting you and you're going to be taking damage. It almost reminds me of the way that Incinerate is, where like you just kind of have to tank the damage in order to deal the damage, because you want them to stay inside that blizzard for the ice spikes. So that's essentially what is actually newer with this build. It's basically that it has a lot more survivability with that newer item, and on top of that, you can get a little bit more damage out of the build. So for starters, let's go ahead and go over these skills, and I would just want to go ahead and mention Blizzard does not deal the damage, but it is still considered a Blizzard Sorceress because Blizzard, while it itself doesn't deal the damage, it spawns ice spikes. Those actually deal damage. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get started with the skills. So as far as the skills go, we're going to be running obviously Blizzard. That's our source of damage. Then this one over here, Deep Freeze, just allows us to cleanse any sort of debuffs, and I really like it for that. If you've got a bunch of poison stacks just activated, then just hop off of it. And on top of that, with the pit, especially when you are pushing, things tend to get a little bit dangerous with the boss. So if there's like a boss mechanic that you just want to dodge, if you've ever played like League of Legends, think of it kind of like a Zanya's Hourglass. You pop it, you're invulnerable, they're not going to be able to deal damage to you, and then you just remove it instantly. You don't have to stay in it the whole time, but if you do want to, you do get ice spikes during that, but it is objectively slower. But it's nice just to activate, and it's kind of satisfying to push once in a while, and I do like it for that. And remember, Yen's Blessing won't actually activate this, but it's just a free slot. If you don't want to run Deep Freeze, that's totally fine, but you do run an aspect anyways that would actually benefit off of Deep Freeze. But the reason why Deep Freeze isn't really super good for damage is because the ice spikes are too spread apart. There's also a new temper with the item that if you wanted to put on, you can get increased blizzard size, but you don't want that. This is where it's bait. So the reason why you don't want that, as far as we are aware of right now, unless things update, how it works is when you spawn with the glacial aspect, you'll see over here we have it. It says when you cast Blizzard, it'll spawn these ice spikes that deal damage, right? Now, the thing is that the ice spikes spawn a set amount, and if the blizzard size is much larger, they're going to spread. You want them all condensed, so you hit them with overlaps. If you played Path of Exile, that's kind of like the similar like wording here. So basically, you want as many ice spikes condensed in a small space versus having them spread out and not being able to hit the same target multiple times. And ideally, this is mainly for bosses, but in theory, if you wanted Blizzard to do the damage, the increased size would be okay, but you don't want that because, again, ice spikes is your source of damage, so it is not actually good to get that. And that's why you'll see consistently on every single build, they will not roll the Blizzard size, because that was a question that I got asked also, like, why wouldn't you want to increase the size? Well, It's because you get actually less DPS if you do that. And then on top of that, on the temper, there's a weapon thing that you can actually add to give yourself extra shadow or poison damage, which will activate Tal Rasha's again. So that's another like thing that may be kind of different here with this season. So kind of went over the two skills, but now we're into Flame Shield, so you just activate it for survivability, but it'll also activate your fire damage for Tal Rasha's. And then Ice Armor, this is so incredibly good. We actually max this out. You'll see we do not even put 5 points into Blizzard. Again, Blizzard is just there to activate Ice Spikes. Then Ice Armor, this is a huge for survivability, and on top of that, there is a newer node that you can get in the build, which is called the Mystical Armor, which will actually give you some increased damage, or you can go with Shimmering. It's kind of up to you on what you want. If you don't have enough cooldown reduction, then Shimmering is totally great as well. If you need more survivability, Shimmering is great, more uptime, or if you really want extra damage, you can go for a Mystical. But either way, as long as you're in combat, you pretty much will have it up most of the time because of Yen's Blessing, the new unique that just got added into Season 4. But other than that, Frost Nova, you can freeze things. It's good because you do more damage against targets that are actually frozen, so it's part of it. Remember, this stat will actually double on a two-hander. We are going to be running this on a two-hander. And then we just run Teleport. And if you're wondering why do we run this on two-hander, this is our main source of damage. We need that number to be as high as possible. So ideally, you get this to be perfectly rolled, or anywhere from like 6,000 plus, it'll start to feel pretty good. But if it's in the lower area of the game, unless you're in the end game, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it. But once you're in the end game, you really need this number to be high in order for the build to actually feel good, because that's what everything scales off of. For the enchantments, Ice Armor, this is great because, well, you're going to be able to actually have extra survivability because it's just going to be up most of the time. And then we also have Frozen Orb over here, and the reason why is it can apply vulnerability or give you some sort of resource. If you really want to, in theory, you can add some sort of source of burning to the build, and then you can get extra damage to burning enemies. That is another option if you want to. But in this build, normally with any like damage over time sort of builds, you don't really want to scale, let's say, like attack speed or crit, but the way it works is the Ice Spike, since that is your source of damage, and because you want to cast as many blizzards as possible to spawn as many Ice Spikes as possible, you actually do want both those stats. So as far as like the aspects go, obviously if you happen to have like Ring of the Starless Skies or the Hallowed Crest, those are great options, but I'm not going to include Uber Uniques in the build guide here. Everliving is great, Juggernauts is great, you can get Frozen Tundra. This makes it so it's for Deep Freeze to get Ice Spikes to spawn in and do damage, but it's specifically for the Ice Spikes to have increased explosions. This is basically part of your damage, so it's really big to get that. And then I really like Snow Veiled Aspect. This is something where when you cast Ice Armor, you're going to gain Unstoppable. So one of the problems that you'll have with Incinerate as well as Blizzard is because if the target cannot be frozen like a boss, right, it's going to be pushing you around, and it makes it so much better just to become unstoppable, and you don't have to worry about any crowd control, getting feared, whatever. Any negative debuff, you don't have to worry about it at all. So I really like the Snow Veiled Aspect. You can also run, if you want to, there is like that vampire power that lets you get unstoppable as well. But this just makes it like easier just to cast it because it has no animation. You don't have to do anything. So you can sit there, and the way that both of the shields work in Diablo 4 is they have no animation. So you can be channeling, you can doing whatever, and then just activate, and you don't even have to do anything. And plus this automatically activates, so it's great. And then Yen's Blessing over here. If you don't have it, the build still functions perfectly fine. It just means that you won't happen to get like 100% uptime. You can see my cooldown right there. It's almost right back up, and then I'm just going to pop it as soon as I get into a fight. Again, once you're in combat, it's up pretty much most of the time anyways, and it's just so excellent for that reason of just being unstoppable, so I really like that. But yeah, Yen's Blessing also gives you damage reduction, and normally that doesn't actually roll on your pieces of gear as far as the boots department. But if you happen to have a normal pair of boots, you can get int life, you can get mana per second. That's also an option. And then we are going to be running a two-handed staff. The only thing that I think is kind of nice to get in there is that resource cost reduction, because otherwise you run out of mana quite fast as you want to be spamming on your Blizzard. There's also another option if you want to run Esu's Ferocity. That is another option. You will have to add a source of burn into the build, but it will give you a lot more attack speed. But at the moment, it's really hard to upkeep without Ring of the Starless Skies, and I did not want to drop a build that like requires the Uber Unique in order to function. But if you do run Esu's and you do happen to have Ring, that is another option. You get way more DPS with that. Also, Intercom is great because this build primarily does hold still. If we look at like kind of how you're supposed to fight some of the bosses, yeah, you're gonna hold still, so you're gonna get a lot of damage. Or if you're doing any of like the endgame bosses like the Uber Duriel, Ideally, though, if you are interested in doing like the Tormented, the level 200 bosses, I'm just going to say it's just much better to run a one-shot build, but if you're just doing like the regular ones, that's totally fine as well. But also give you guys some like Helltide gameplay to mix it up. But yeah, Intercom is great, nothing too important. If you can get resource cost reduction, cooldown reduction, those are all great stats. You can also roll Ice Spike damage here. And then for your ring, you can also get extra damage over here. Crit strike, attack speed, same thing with the gloves, attack speed, crit strike. Those are all great because that will scale your Ice Spike. And then Tal Rasha's because it goes in every single build. In terms of the gems here, if you happen to have really good rolls as far as crit goes, then you can run an emerald. If not, just run a sapphire. It's going to be much better. It kind of depends on your crit as well as like your build. But ideally, ruby or not ruby, ruby in the armor though, and then in the jewelry you can throw in diamond. But sapphire or emerald, if you happen to have like 80+% crit, then you will run the emerald, and you also get 20% crit for free with the Paragon. So as far as the skill tree goes, you need to put enough points in to move on to the next page, so that's why we should put into Potent Warding, because this is not going to increase our damage here. And for the Frozen Orb, if you need mana, get Destructive. If you need to have vulnerability, you can run Greater Frozen Orb. I also ran a Cursed Touch in here so we can apply vulnerability. That is one thing that Sorceress has always been bad with, is applying vulnerability. So you can run Frost Nova to apply it, but I like the new Frost Nova one, which we'll get into the tree, which gives you a bunch of resources as well. But you need some source of vulnerable in the build. And then over here, just getting the Shimmering Teleport, and then we also get the Mystical or Shimmering Ice Armor. And then I really like this brand new thing called Shimmering Frost Nova. So what this allows us to do is it grants us extra dodge per enemy hit. So you can up to 15% dodge, which is pretty dang good. That's basically 2 perfect rolls on dodge for the most part. And then if you hit a boss, you get the maximum amount, and all of the successful dodges generate 20 mana. This could actually be pretty insane. There's going to be pretty much another newer Immortal build that if you play with Selig plus this, as well as there's one where when you take damage, you could actually if you do dodge it, you gain like 20% of your HP, and it's actually pretty dang good. And I'm going to reserve that for another video, though, because that's kind of like a new way to kind of get immortality, so to speak, and it might get nerfed, but I will save that for another one. And if you get extra lucky hit chance, that's okay, because, again, this build will actually have a lot of free skill points. So Mana Shield just for extra survivability, we get Snap Freeze just so we can freeze things more often, because we do more damage to frozen targets with this over here. That is the Glacial aspect. And then with this, we just get Blizzard to last longer, so more Ice Spikes are spawned in. We get all the cold nodes. We only need 1 point in here, but if you want to put, another point into Supreme, just resets your cooldowns. It also makes him vulnerable, but it's much more consistent in other ways. So I mentioned Esku's Frost is probably one of the coolest things in the game. Unfortunately, the lucky hit chance on Blizzard is just simply not great. So Avalanche kind of loses out on a lot of value because of that. Because I believe Ice Spikes doesn't have a proc on the crit rate, or if it's like vulnerable, because it just says your frost skills have a chance, and on top of that, the bonus damage that you would get from it, well, it just increases your Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard. Does not actually work for Ice Spikes. If it did, then that would actually be good. So our only option is really Shatter, which makes so after the freeze expires, all the damage kind of builds up and explodes. It kind of reminds me of like the Malignant Heart that we had before, which was like the Barber. So it's kind of nice, but most of the stuff in the open world dies so fast it doesn't matter. And then for the bosses, it's kind of like the only one that you have, but you can run Veer's Mastery if you want to, and you can make it so you just take 15%. Just closer enemies take more damage from your shock skills, which we can't apply, but they also just deal 20% less damage to you. If you want to, that is another option, since Teleport will also be a skill that kind of works, but that's only for your shock skills. It's just, again, for DR, there's another aspect if you want to that can help out with that as well. But if you really want to min-max, I'd say Eskus is like still one of the best things in the game. And then as far as the Paragon board, starting out with the starter board and Elementalist, then we go into the Enchantment Master and Unleash, so we get some extra mana regen. And then Elemental Summoner Control. Getting these extra health nodes is quite great. While we don't need to be at above 100 mana or more to cast skills like I normally do with the Sorceress, because getting 100% crit is quite easy, that only works with your core and mastery skills, and Ice Spikes is not classified as one of those. Then we go ahead and go into Icefall. We get Winter over here, so we do more damage when we chill and freeze enemies, which is going to be all the dang time. And then we go back down here into Frigid Fate, into Destruction, so we get extra vulnerable damage over here. Well, it's, extra extra damage to the total amount of cold damage, and obviously we get a lot of cold damage in the build because we get a bunch of non-physical the way that this board is designed. And then we get the Burning Instinct / Stalagmite. I just like this one because it's relatively close, and if you want to run another board, that's fine, but none of them are going to give you like a huge bonus to like anything. I mean, over here it does give you DR from enemies that are burning, which can apply with your flame shield, but none of these are really, again, that important over here. It's just that I went and threw it in this board. But it's basically that our ice spikes gain additional crit strike chance. It's 20% crit strike chance, and also gives us some extra damage. But the last one is kind of flexible on the last board, as there's really nothing else that's really like you need. And other things, if you do want to run Harlequin Crest or Esu's Ferocity, that is totally up to you. You can also run the Esu's Boots, you can run Tibalt's. It's kind of up to you on what you want to run as far as uniques go. I'd try not to include too many uniques in any build, especially if they're uber uniques, but you don't have to play with the Yen's Blessing. It's just something I wanted to throw in because I thought it was actually not too bad, and it was like the only build that I've seen kind of have some good use out of it, because again, you can get, if you want to, 20x multiplicative damage that you can upkeep quite consistently, and on top of that, you're going to be able to chill those close enemies, because in this build, the enemies are just going to walk up to you, and if they're frozen, you do deal more damage, so you get even more damage with this, so it's quite nice. I mean, there's a 20 with this over here, and then on top of that, you get another 30x. You get 50x if they are frozen. That's a pretty big, massive amount. That's almost like 2 aspects on its own. There's also a Storm Swell aspect that you can throw on if you do want to run that instead of one of the other offensive ones. But that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for the build. Let me know, guys, your thoughts down below. But if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it if you're new here and want to see an update to this build or any of the other ones, because I have a lot more Sorceress builds coming out very soon. There's actually going to be a crazy teleport build that I'll be dropping very soon. But anyways, take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next video, and everything will be pinned down below for the planner.